What's up, everyone? Welcome back. You know who I am, and you're very obviously on some kind of streaming platform. So with that being said, we're talking basketball.
What? Knew it.
Now, I got a good streak going here of Raptors content, and I'm going to continue it because today we are going to discuss whether or not the Raptors should be considering a trade for the beard himself, for James Harden. Now, OddsShark actually currently has the Raptors at the third best odds to have Harden for the start of next season on their team. Funny enough, Harden recently, reports came out that Harden recently said he would also be open to a trade to Philly and other contenders. Obviously, in this case, we're assuming that the Raptors would be one of the other contenders that he would be open to joining. Funny enough, actually, the Raptors on OddsShark, as they're currently third, have better odds than Philly. Right now, obviously, Houston's number one to still retain him for this season. The Nets are number two, and the Raptors are actually number three. And I'm assuming part of this, part of this thing where their odds are so high, part of the link is something to do with the Kawhi trade, I would say, and the fact that obviously Masai has shown willingness to go get a disgruntled star and turn it, in the last time's case at least, turn it into a championship roster. So I think that's kind of where the link comes from a little bit here. But the Raptors have actually pursued a trade for Harden in the past. I don't know if you guys knew that, but this would have been, mind you, like ages ago when he was still being traded out of OKC. The Raptors almost traded for James Harden. You want to know why they didn't? They were unwilling to give up Valanciunas at the time, which I mean, like, on one hand, I kind of get it. Harden was only a six-man at the time. He wasn't the superstar that we know him as today. And Valanciunas was a, top-tier prospect, and this was way before the NBA kind of went into the revolution of, like, shooting being so emphasized, and big men were still a lot more valuable. But nonetheless, this deal, in terms of Harden to Toronto, has almost happened in the past. And now we're going to discuss whether or not it should happen in the near future. So what are the packages that Toronto can put together for James Harden? I'm going to break this news right off the bat, and Raptors fans aren't going to like it, but in order to make a James Harden trade work, we're going to have to give up Kyle Lowry.
That is blasphemous. That is blasphemous.
Believe me, there is a photo of him up on my wall behind me. I know that Raptors fans love Kyle. They love him to death. But that's just the unfortunate news of it. If a Harden trade is to work here for the Raptors, you have to, and unfortunately, I'm going to say it one more time, you have to give up Kyle Lowry to make the money work here. Unless you want to give up Siakam, which at this point in both their careers, you're retaining Siakam. Anyways, so I put together a couple packages here, and it was really kind of difficult to, gauge how much leverage Houston has in this situation in terms of draft pick compensation and what they can be asking for in Harden. Because on one hand, he's one of the best players in the game, obviously, right? He is probably a top 5 player, if not top 5, literally just outside of it. But I mean, by my estimations at least, he's a top 5 player in the game today. So he's obviously one of the most valuable commodities in basketball. And on one hand, he's shown a bit of an unwillingness to be in Houston, which should give you a reason to think that maybe the teams trying to trade for him have a little bit of leverage in that regard. But at the same time, he hasn't outright come out and said, I don't want to be in Houston next season. So the Rockets don't have to move him here, but it kind of feels like it's in their best interest to do so, because while he hasn't outright come out and said, I don't want to be a member of this team anymore, I think there's a growing feeling of the fact that Harden and many people around NBA circles feel like the Rockets have peaked in terms of what they can do with Harden and, in terms of being a championship contender. And I think he kind of knows that. I don't know if they necessarily have accepted that yet, but I think part of the reason why Harden may want out of Houston is the fact that he just doesn't see himself winning there, and he wants that championship ring. And where better to go than Toronto, that has, obviously put this together before with a disgruntled star, but we'll get to that later in the video. But yeah, nonetheless, I think with all this to consider, it's a little hard to gauge his trade value, but nonetheless, I tried to put together some packages. You can argue the draft pick compensation if you want in the comment section. So this first trade here is probably going to be the one that Raptors fans like the least, because not only are you giving up Kyle Lowry, but you're giving up OG Anunoby in the process. Obviously, threw in a couple picks in there and Patrick McCaw, all to make the money work a little bit better. So you're getting James Harden, you're getting Daniel House if you're the Raptors, and you're getting just a plethora of assets if you're the Rockets. OG, I think, is obviously the big selling point of this trade here. You want to convince the Rockets that, hey, OG might, have star potential. I think he does have star potential, and I think that's what you're selling Houston on in this trade. I think this is the easiest trade to sell Houston on with OG because he has shown flashes and he's really developing a consistent offensive skill set away from being a star, which is why I think it is relatively easy to sell the Rockets on this trade. If you're the Raptors, I mean, there's reason to like it as well. Obviously, James Harden gives you what James Harden's going to give you. I'm going to get into why I think he is a good fit for the Raptors later in the video, but you're getting a top 5 player in the league, and you're getting Daniel House, so you will have somebody to start at that small forward position, despite the fact that you're losing OG. So it's a trade that kind of is likable for both teams for its own reasons. But I know that this is the one that Raptors fans are going to look at and be like, God, no. Kyle and OG, no way. The next one here is kind of a combination of one that's going to be later on in this video and, the first one. So instead of OG Anunoby, you're going to have Terrence Davis here, as your selling point, kind of as the prospect that Houston should be, excited about, taking a chance on, and you're saying, hey, listen, TD has shown flashes in his first season. He could very well develop into a star given, the proper opportunity, which Houston would obviously be able to offer him. And you kind of downplay, obviously, the fact that he has charges off the court against him and he might have a suspension coming. Like, we're not going to talk about that with Houston. But, I mean, obviously, here you increase the draft picks that you're going to offer because, obviously, TD isn't as enticing as OG Anunoby would be in a trade. So you throw in some extra picks, and you see if Houston will bite on that. And then obviously in this scenario here, partly because of the money, but also because of what you're giving up, you're not going to get anybody else other than Harden. It's just going to be straight Harden for Toronto. This next one here is the one that's just an absolute haul in terms of draft picks, where Toronto just says, screw it. We are in win now mode. We see James Harden putting this team over the top. So obviously you're giving up Lowry and McCaw to make the money work. You're giving up Matt Thomas as kind of, again, a prospect, but I mean, he's 26 years old, so he is a little bit on the older side, so he's not as much of a prospect, but you still give up something a little bit extra just to entice Houston. And then you just unload a haul of draft picks being like, we're not going to need these. We are going to be a contender for the foreseeable future. These picks aren't going to be high picks, and in this case, the Raptors would be comfortable giving up those picks. And obviously, they have some decent protection on these picks as well. In particular, the 2027 pick is lottery protected in case they're not a good team by then. They do get it back, and they do get to make their own pick. But this is really Toronto saying, we're good enough to win now. We think Harden gives us that chance. We want to give up as little as we can in terms of on-court assets. So OG, TD, so on and so forth. Not including this because they see them as key pieces in a potential championship team. And with all that being said, they say, I don't want to swear on here, but they say, screw it. Give us Harden. Take all these draft picks. So this last one here is going to be one where you're really kind of doing right by Kyle Lowry. It's a 3-team deal, and it's involving the Clippers. And before, I see the jokes in the comment section because I can almost picture it in my head now. Yes, Kawhi Leonard is absolutely trying to assemble the Raptors championship team in LA. So in this trade, the Clippers are going to receive Kyle Lowry, which I think is obviously huge for them. They've done nothing to address the fact that they just don't have a good playmaker on that team still. And I think Kyle Lowry gives them that, on top of the fact that you don't really lose. From going from Patrick Beverley to Kyle Lowry, it's not like you're losing out defensively. You could even make the argument that you're upgrading defensively at that spot. So I see all the reason like this if you're the Clippers, if you're the Raptors. We've talked about it before. We've talked about what a Harden trade potentially does for them. And if you're the Rockets, I mean, some of the pieces here that you're getting excited about maybe aren't as exciting as you feel like they should be. Like, I mean, Zubac is a fun prospect, I think, if you're the Clippers, that you could be excited about. And you do get a good haul of picks, despite the fact that a lot of them are going to be second rounders just because the Clippers don't have first rounders to offer at this point. And I'm sure they wouldn't after the Paul George trade, even if they did. But that being said, I mean, it is a trade where I see the Raptors and the Clippers probably taking this. I maybe would have some reservations about the Rockets taking this, but you could talk me into it. You could talk me into a scenario where Houston sits there and likes Zubac enough and all the picks that they're getting, thinking that they can package them together and move up eventually. I could see the Rockets getting talked into this one, but I'm not going to lie. If you're the Rockets here, I think you're probably the least interested in this trade out of the three teams involved. Let's talk about the on-court fit here and why the Raptors obviously would be interested in this trade. Now, before we fully get into it, I think it is important to kill some of the faulty narratives that are around James Harden, because for whatever reasons, there's circles in the NBA community that still believe these things, even though they just kind of seem ridiculous at this point. Let's start off with the most obvious one, the James Harden doesn't play defense narrative. Just not true. Just not true at all. Has not been true for like half a decade at this point. James Harden has been a good defender for a while, in particular, like in recent seasons. I would say I don't know if I'd quite say he's very good, but like he is a good one-on-one defender. He's good at getting steals as well, obviously, and he's even half decent at getting blocks for guard. So like, I don't know where this narrative still comes from at this point. Like, I don't know if some people are still living in like 2013, 2014 in their heads, whatever it is, but James Harden is a good defender. Get rid of that notion that he's not right off the bat. I think in that sense, he fits with the Raptors defense very well. I think he's reasonably switchable for the most part too when it comes to at least some of the like smaller guys on the court. So defensively, I think he's a huge add to the Raptors. You're not, like, yes, you're losing a little bit going from Kyle to Harden, but you're not losing that much at all. Next, again, I don't know where this comes from. Like, I don't know who gives this life and just kind of why other people accept it. James Harden is a good passer. Like, there's a narrative, again, that like James Harden just doesn't pass the ball. And I get it. There's a lot of plays that you can watch where James Harden dribbles the ball a lot and just pulls up for a shot. But James Harden, for like the better part of his stint, for most of his stint in Houston, has been one of the best playmakers in the league. Hell, I would even go as far as arguing he's the best playmaker at the shooting guard position. That I just don't understand where, you know, this idea that he doesn't pass the ball comes from. Like, there was literally a year where I think he was leading the NBA in assists, if I'm not mistaken, the year that it was him versus Westbrook in the MVP debate, where obviously Westbrook won. But Harden was leading the league in assists. That was the year he was playing point guard. You can't reasonably convince me that this guy can't pass when his coach is comfortable enough to put him at the point guard position. And when you put him at the point guard position, he leads the league in assists. Like, it's just another ridiculous notion around James Harden. Speaking of ridiculous notions around James Harden, I'm going to knock off the last one here. And this one, I don't want to say it has a little bit more credit to it, but like, I get where people are coming from, but I still think it's a wrong narrative in the grand scheme of things. It's the narrative that James Harden's a playoff choker. James Harden, if you look at the numbers, he puts them up. He puts them up in the playoffs. I understand that Harden's teams haven't gone to an NBA Finals. I understand that Harden's teams haven't won, but I think that has more to do with the kind of gimmicky structure of what the Houston Rockets tried to put on the court at some points during James Harden's career, in terms of the fact that he just needed better teams around him. And believe me, like, I'm not trying to make excuses for the guy in that case. Like, I do think there have been moments where James Harden has come up short on his own merit in the playoffs. But with that being said, like, people, you know, have this playoff choker narrative, and they want to kind of, I don't want to say they want to ignore it, but for the most part, yeah, they do ignore the fact that, and I hate talking hypotheticals, but I think it's important here. The year in Houston where Chris Paul gets injured at the end of Game 5, The Rockets win the championship that year, 100%. If Chris Paul doesn't go down and they have Chris Paul available for the last 2 games of the series, to close out Golden State. And, for whoever wants to sit there and clap back and be like, oh yeah, but like, why wasn't Harden able to, do without Chris Paul if he's so great? So I'm sorry. Against that Warriors team with 4 All-Stars, with Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, you want James Harden to go out there by himself, not entirely by himself, like obviously he had some decent role players, but without a second star. You want James Harden to go out there and beat that team when LeBron James couldn't? Come on, man. Like, that's ridiculous. Anyways, all this kind of alludes to the fact too, I think his playoff choker label that some people want to slap on him is overblown. I don't think he's ever been the main reason why Houston, hasn't gone as far as they should in the playoffs. I really do think it's been the situation around him. Now, speaking of situations around him, let's talk about why on court, he works with the Raptors. I've already talked about the defense and the passing. I don't think that's an issue whatsoever. I think he fits into Nurse's system well there. What I really think he gives this team and why they should like it is very obviously similar to what we had when Kawhi was here. It's having a superstar that can go get your own offense in the playoffs when otherwise your system is stalling out. Because let's be honest, in the playoffs, when you're playing half court a lot, just some of these sets that you're going to be doing aren't going to be working as well as they are in the regular season, and obviously the pace is slowing down. You need a guy that's just going to go out there, create his own shots, and get buckets. And James Harden, and I can't stress this enough, James Harden is the best bucket getter in basketball. He's the best ISO scorer in basketball, with all due respect to guys like Kevin Durant and whoever else you want to throw in there. But James Harden has been doing it year after year, producing offense like an absolute flamethrower. To put him on the Raptors and to really give the Raptors a kind of star that can go do that for them, and when their offense fails, he can go in there and just produce a three-pointer or an easy layup at the basket or a nice mid-range jumper, whatever the case may be. That is something that I truly think really could put Toronto over the top. The other important question here to ask is, obviously we've talked about the on-court fit. How does he fit off-court? Does he fit the team culture? And I feel like this is where I've seen most Raptors fans have kind of reservations about a potential trade for Harden. And I understand. If Masai Ujiri sells Harden on the fact and he feels comfortable with the fact that Harden is sold on being a part of this team and a part of what they do here, I think you should be comfortable enough to make this trade. Now, this all comes down to the big question, right? Should the Raptors do it? And I'm gonna cop out a little bit here on this answer because I have mixed feelings about this one. I really do. You can make the argument for both. You could tell me that you don't want to see the Raptors pick up James Harden, and I can understand why. And you could also tell me that you would want to see the Raptors have James Harden on that team, and I could also see why. If push really came to shove and you asked me whether or not they should do this trade, I would say do it, but I would say do it if you can hold on to OG. I think that's where I would draw the line there. So that does it for me today. Obviously, this is a long video with a lot of thoughts shared, so I'm assuming everybody's gonna have thoughts of their own, so obviously, I'd love to see them. Comment below. Let me know what you think about a potential James Harden trade to Toronto. Obviously, he's one of the most polarizing players in the league, so I expect the opinions on it to really be split down the middle, but I'm excited to see them. If you have the chance, like the video, it really helps me out a lot. Share it if you can, subscribe if you're on YouTube. All that goes a long way. I truly appreciate when you folks do it. And yeah, that's gonna do it for me today, and I am out of here.